When you're riding the bullet train in Japan, my number one snack, the one that I always go for when I'm coming through the station on the way to the platform, is the one and only Katsu Sando. Katsu Sando is actually a truncation. It's the short form of a phrase that nobody ever says. It's short for Katsuretsu Sandoichi. It's a cutlet sandwich in the Japanese form. What we need to do first is make our tonkatsu, our Japanese schnitzel. If you don't know what this is all about, go back and watch the first video that explains in detail how we're making our perfect tonkatsu. So before we get started on everything else, let's get started on that. Tonkatsu are cooked, so it's time to put together the sandwich. It's a pretty simple thing to do. All it is a couple of sauces, some mayonnaise, mustard, and tonkatsu sauce. Of course, you could use any of the other tonkatsu sauces that we've made, either the express kind of homemade version, the pre-packaged version, or our full bells and whistles from scratch version. Any of those are completely fine. But one thing that I do want to do is make a mayonnaise mustard sauce that'll go on one side of our fluffy Japanese bread. Bit of Japanese mayo and karashi. This is Japanese mustard, but you could easily use a hot English mustard or something similar like that. And now for the bread. This is not something where you want to be using, say, an artisan sourdough. A Japanese Katsusando should have that fluffy Japanese or Asian style white bread that kind of coats around and is like a pillow around our tonkatsu. I've probably got enough tonkatsu there to make maybe 3 sandwiches. And if you're wondering at the moment, you know, why I'm just letting it sit there, why I'm letting it go cold, I guess you could say, it's because if you're in Japan, a Katsu Sando is something that is eaten at room temperature. You almost never, in fact, I've never in my time in Japan seen a tonkatsu sandwich served anything other than at room temperature, and usually as sort of a takeaway food, whether you're at a train station getting onto a bullet train or from a convenience store. So I understand that, I guess in the West now it's very popular to have these cafes serving Katsu Sandos and things piping hot, but the style of Katsu Sando I'm making is for serving at room temperature. It can still be slightly warm. These are still gonna be slightly warm as we're eating them, but they're not gonna be piping hot straight out of the fryer. I actually wanna put a bit of wrap down. You know, this is beeswax wrap, but you could easily use plastic wrap. I just try to use as little plastic wrap as possible. And it's because I'm gonna press these sandwiches. Most Japanese sandwiches are pressed to give them a kind of compact look. The ones that you get, I guess, that aren't made properly, that are falling a bit apart, the term in Japanese for that is boroboro, or disheveled, or kind of ramshackle. But we're trying to make a Katsu Sando that is going to be sort of all together. So take the bread aside for now, but just lightly spread a little bit of butter onto the bread. It's actually quite important, the butter. You know, you can sometimes think you can skip it, but the butter just helps to prevent too much of the oil from the cutlet or too much of the liquid from the sauces from soaking in to the bread. And now what's gonna be the top side of the sandwich, I wanna spread my mustard mayonnaise. And make sure you take these right to the edges of the sandwich. You know, we're trying to make something that's almost geometric here. So you don't want areas that are not going to be coated in our sauces. Now for the tonkatsu sauce. I'm gonna put that on both of these cutlets. And with this, I want it to go down onto the bread. Bit of shredded cabbage on top. Now, not too much of this. You don't want too much of the shredded cabbage, because if you've got too much, your sandwich isn't really gonna hold together very well. So just a very, very light amount. It's just supposed to be a little bit of texture. You can even do it without the cabbage altogether, but I like a little bit of the cabbage texture in my Katsu Sando. Then close it back over, fold the wrap over the top of everything, and I'll put a chopping board on top. I'll get some heavy plates to sit on top of that, so it's slowly pushing that bread and molding it around our pork cutlets. And I'll let that sit and mold for about 10 minutes. 10 minutes has passed and I think we're looking pretty good. Move our weights off to one side, board two. And here are our sandwiches. This is crunch time though. This is the hardest part because we want to be able to cut these sandwiches, but also not have them fall apart. You're gonna need your absolute sharpest knife. Often for cutting bread, people will use a serrated knife. You absolutely don't want to do that when you're making a Japanese sandwich because the serrated knife is just gonna tear all of those fins apart. You're gonna lose the structural integrity. I'm aware that the cutlets are actually going between all of these different sandwiches here, so a very, very sharp knife to cut off the crusts. That looks pretty good, doesn't it? When it comes to Katsu Sandos, it really does pay to be the one who's making them because there's lots and lots of these offcuts that you want to give a good home to. And then each sandwich, you're going to want to cut into thirds. So kind of just roughly measure out so you're getting them quite even because you want to stand them up all together. And push through with the knife through the bread until you hit resistance, then a slight sawing motion, and then finish with a cut. Now these look absolutely marvelous. Katsusando, Japanese pork cutlet sandwiches.